We're just, if you're watching the recording, we are at step 1. If you're looking in the book underneath chapter 4 for our candles. So that's all we've got done before the recording. Just to make this is one of the materials that we are doing for part of the demo. I'm only going to be demoing 3 materials out of the book this week. I'm going to be doing this one, the glass, and the holographic Christmas tree. So you're going to be responsible for 3 other materials through the book that you're just going to have to follow along with the book and do. The ones that you're going to do for grade are going to be the mirror. There's a realistic mirror that actually shows you like the actual reflection, and that's going to be really fun. You're going to also do the bathtub on your own, and then you're going to do the bathtub caustics on your own. We're not going to do the ocean, but the sea shader is really cool, and if you're really into this, I would recommend doing it. It might be helpful for the 2 custom ones you have to do. The 2 custom ones you have to do on top of on your own, the mirror, the bathtub, and the bathtub caustics, is you're going to revisit the slime shader and try to make a better slime shader based off of what you've learned this week. And you're going to try to make a better magic smoke based on what you learned this week, because you're going to have a lot more knowledge, and you're going to be able to do a lot more interesting things that I think you'll be able to revisit those and make much better ones, and it'll be much more interesting than what you had previously. So with that said, hopefully you've had the opportunity to get really caught up, and there's nobody behind. Let me just make sure I save this. We are going to start with the wax, and we're going to need to do 3 textures in here, some texture samples. So hold down T, and you can just click 3 times, 1, 2, 3. And this first one we're going to put in here, if you want to search for, it's T for candle, and it's the color and OP. And that goes in that one. This one is going to get T, and it's the AORM. And we're going to talk later, once we get it kind of done, a little bit about all these different, like what these are, because it's pretty interesting. So the last one is going to be your normal map. So we can just find the normal map, T candle. Right, that would help. And the way that these are going to be hooked up is, sorry, I'm making sure I can see the latest in the chat online. This is your base color, so RBG goes into the base color. Out of this specific texture, the red channel is going to be your ambient occlusion, and your green channel is going to be your roughness. And I know that seems like a really weird texture, but we're going to come back. Actually, no, let's talk about it right now. Let's hook up that normal map. So we might as well talk about it now. This texture here, the one that's called color and OP, what it has in there is it has actually an RGB, which is going to be your base color, and it has an alpha channel in there that we're going to use eventually as a mask later on. So rather than having to import in a whole separate texture for a grayscale mask, we're going to be utilizing the A channel of this material. Now this thing is a special kind of texture, and this is a very common technique with creating materials that you're going to see not only in Unreal, but Unity does this as well. In fact, you probably would want to look up, usually each game engine does this a little bit differently, but honestly, you could probably just choose where all of these go. So what does AORM stand for? It stands for ambient occlusion, AO for ambient occlusion, R for roughness, and M for metallic. Because ambient occlusion maps, roughness maps, metal maps, what kind of maps are they? Like, what do they look like as far as, I'm trying to figure out how to describe this. They're not color maps, right? They're grayscale. So rather than bringing in 3 different grayscale images and having to deal with uploading 3 different pictures to here, 3 different textures for here, you just stick the ambient occlusion inside the red channel. You stick the roughness grayscale image inside the green channel, and you would stick your metallic map inside the blue channel. But candles don't have metals, so there's no blue channel on here. This is a very common technique so that you're not importing in a whole bunch of stuff. You only have to do you only have to call this one texture versus 3 different textures, and it can help out, makes things a lot easier. There's a lot of different ways to pack things. If you're working in Painter, you can do a specific export that will do this for you. Otherwise, you can just take those into Photoshop and just paste them into the correct channels and save it out. And that, that's one method to do that. So this is a very common technique just to kind of save space and save memory. Makes things a lot easier. So that's what the AORM is. Ambient occlusion, roughness, metallic. And you can just remember that because it's going down the list: ambient occlusion, roughness, metallic. I believe, but I always just look it up because I always forget. Unity might have the G and the B flipped, and I know Unity doesn't do roughness. They do the glossiness, I believe. Do they do glossiness or specular? I don't remember, but I know it's the opposite of roughness, so you usually have to invert that for Unity anyway. But again, if you are planning to make materials, fancy materials for Unity, it's a good idea to quickly look up a little guide to make sure that you're not messing things up. Questions about that? Okay. So we got this. We can apply and save it. And we can take a quick look. Slow this down. And it's not quite subsurface yet. So we have our base material on here. The next step is going to be to actually create our subsurface profile. So I'm going to come into where I created this material, and I'm going to right click, and I'm going to choose to create, where is it? Content, create advanced asset. Material, why did the directions do it? That's weird. Okay, so materials and textures. Hold on. Oh, okay. Materials and textures, a subsurface, sorry. Create advanced asset, materials and textures, a subsurface profile. And this is where we're actually going to set that up. We're going to call it SSP_wax. So that we can, this is what actually is going to control those subsurface properties, because we need to set a lot of settings for this in order for this to work correctly. So we're going to eventually mess around with inside of here, but we might as well go ahead and set this in our material so that it's utilizing it, so we'll actually be able to see it in the scene as we make adjustments. So I'm going to go back to the material. I'm going to make sure I don't have anything selected because I don't accidentally want a node selected. And down over here, we're going to locate underneath the material tab where it says the shading model. rather than default lit, we're going to change it to Subsurface Profile, not Subsurface, Subsurface Profile, because we're creating our own. We can then come down here where it wants a Subsurface Profile, and we can find our wax. The one that you're making. So I believe we can now go ahead and start to look at that subsurface profile. And I'm going to just save this real quick. And a lot of these changes are going to be kind of subtle. Let me make sure. The lighting was working before. It just takes a moment for it to get going. Yes, question.
So are you able to certain surfaces, subsurface scattering?
Yes. You can't specify region. Well, your whole object is going to be it. But your whole object gets it applied to it. But we're going to actually learn a little bit how you can mask out areas of that object. So it's not. So that's part of it. Is you don't have to have the whole thing because it comes later in the lesson. All right. So, oops. Have this. And I'm going to open up my subsurface scattering. I'm trying to do this in a way that you can actually see the difference as I make changes. Should be good. Okay, so the first thing we're going to want to change is the scatter radius. And this is going to be, it controls the distance the engine uses to perform scattering effect in centimeters. Because remember I said that this kind of stuff, the subsurface scattering is basically like light hits it and it starts to scatter out. So for this, we are going to do a scatter radius of 30. You can already see it kind of change. We're kind of lightened up a little bit. Did you see that? And then the next thing is going to be to change the subsurface color. Usually you want to kind of change. So this controls the effect overall. So let's kind of play around with some values. Like what happens if we make it black? You see how it kind of took it away a little bit. It has like, but let's change it to white. And it looks really kind of matte. Like it's very almost uniform, like almost, I don't want to say like glowing, but it's very, it doesn't have a lot of shadows. It has a lot of like energy almost in there. But what you might want to try to do instead is choose a color close to the actual base color of this. And you're going to get a little, it's going to, for the waxy. Okay, let's keep going. So we got our subsurface color, and the last thing we need to change is the fall-off color. And if we kind of play around with it, we can kind of also see what this does. It's like that pinky color. So for instance, if we change it all to black, we can see what it looks like. If we change it all to white, we can see what it looks like. So black, oops, white. What they kind of recommend in the book is almost like a pinkish red, sort of like this. So this is maybe a little more. There we go. So the last thing that we're going to kind of work on with the, well, actually, we're going to do one more thing, and then we're going to talk a little bit more about it, and I'm going to look at it in another way, is we're going to deal with the fact that while we do have a waxy candle, that wick there probably shouldn't have a subsurface scattering on it, because the wick is like burnt cotton, so it shouldn't have that. So this is where we're going to we're going to use a mask to mask out that. So we're going to use the opacity channel to do this. So if we go back to here, to our graph, and the book really illustrates it really well of what the opacity channel looks like, because it's built into this one, where the wick is black, so masked out, and the rest of it is kind of like a gray, and like along kind of like the top of the candle is more a little bit lighter. So we're going to pull that A, put it into opacity. It was probably a super subtle change. I don't know how visible it is on Teams. But one of the things we do kind of want to show is we can easily now see the difference. Like, they're very small changes. It's like, it kind of looks the same. You really notice it, though, if you start going back and kind of playing around with the various settings. So like if we go, and you don't have to do this on your end, I'm just hoping that you can see it, where I'm going to go back to where we changed the surface type. From surface profile back to like unlit. Where do you change where do you change the plane? Where's that setting? Does anyone know off the top of their head? So I was just trying to be able to get closer. So if we change this back to like a default lit, we can see how we have that lighting now on the surface. If like, don't do this part. This is what it was previously without subsurface scattering. We have all of this lighting that's just kind of hitting the surface and stopping. And then if we change it back to our subsurface profile, so before subsurface scattering, where it instantly has like that waxy sort of look to it. So it's definitely one of those things that you won't run into a crazy amount. But if your surface really needs that subsurface scattering, being able to do it will really add some realism to this. Even if you're trying to do something a little bit more on the cartoony side, like you're making like cartoon characters, might be in your best interest. It might look really good if you still do that subsurface scattering on the skin of your player, even if it is more cartoony, because that's kind of, it'll make it look less plastic. Like you can definitely, if you've watched CG movies as they evolve, like the difference between like Toy Story people versus trying to think of a modern one, like Up or something, or the I don't know why I'm just blanking on movies today. Toy Story people looked really plastic, even the ones that were supposed to be realistic. But if you look at the characters in Toy Story 3 or 4, their skin looked a lot better. And a lot of that has to do with the subsurface scattering that they were able to apply to that then. Any questions about the candle? I'm not sure about that. I would say possibly, because a lot of things are expensive in Unreal. If you're using Unreal, I assume that you're trying to make something, you're going to have a very beefy kind of program at the end of it. We're just concerned about making things look pretty in this class. Okay. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to set up some glass. So let's save this out. If you haven't saved it all, we're going to open up the next demonstration. Save that. Save your map. And we're going to go to our UE4 shaders and effects maps. And then we are going to open up that 0402 glass. Wrong one. There we go. How's the online people doing?
Good.
Okay. Just making sure you're still alive. Online's very quiet today. Again, let's do a file, save current as, and save this into our personal directory. I'll call 0402 in my name. So this one we're going to be working on making a nice glass shader. And again, this is one of those things that you know, once you kind of have one, you should be able to utilize it in multiple places. Like if you understand how it works, you have a glass shader. And when you make other things, you can always kind of tweak some settings to get it to look the way that you want. I know glass shaders in Unreal are one of those that people always want. So if you can do a really nice glass, like people will want to work with you. Okay, so we're going to make a new material in our personal folder called m_glass. And let's go ahead and apply it to the glass object in the scene, just so that as we change it, we'll be able to see it live on there. And before we get into stuff over here, we're going to need to make some changes over here. Yes, question? It's going to be real. Everything's going to be real glass. Like it's going to look like a real glass. We're going to get like all that nice like refraction too. So it's going to look really cool. Okay, so we got this. We need to make some settings over here. So don't make anything yet because we have to come over to the details. And the first thing that we're going to need to change is that we need to make sure the blend mode is changed to translucent. We need to then, after we change it to translucent, we can find the translucency. And we need to check on screen space reflections. We need to make sure that the lighting mode is changed to surface translucency volume. And we need to open this up to look for a couple other settings just to make sure that they are checked. I think they are checked by default, but always good to double check that render after DOF is checked. And the last thing is to make sure, this one isn't checked this time. Used with static lighting needs to be checked. So once we have all of these changed, we'll be able to then come into here and actually start creating a glass shader. And the first thing we're going to do is we're going to create a vector 3 to control the basic color of our glass, which we're going to end up having be kind of like a bluish color. So you can always come in and play around with this later. So we can kind of make like a blue, whatever kind of tint you want to your glass, but generally glass is blue. So we'll hook that into here. And this is an interesting tip that the book does recommend, even though is that it does recommend actually giving it some metallicness, because it says that it'll end up being a little bit more vibrant and actually looking more like glass, even though glass isn't metallic. So they recommend using a scalar parameter of a value of 0.9. So it's pretty metallic. Yep, scalar parameter. You just start right click and just start typing scalar. Are you spelling it correctly? S-C-A-L-A-R. It already kind of has sort of a neat look to it. I do say so myself. Like it's kind of an interesting sort of sphere-looking thing. So the next step after we get this set up is going to be to do the actual reflection, refraction, and opacity. And we're going to be controlling these through a Fresnel. And the way a Fresnel looks, and I'm going to actually make the function first, is I'm going to right click and type in Fresnel, and I'm going to choose the Fresnel function. And what a Fresnel is if you've ever seen it on a sphere, it almost kind of looks like, let me see if I can pull up an image of this. A Fresnel sphere tends to be like kind of dark in the middle and light on the outside. It's called the Fresnel Effect. And we're going to utilize this effect to help us get that glassy sort of look. Because, you know, in a weird way, it kind of looks like glass, you know, because, you know, glass is opaque if you look straight on, but as you get to the edges of if you're looking at like a round glass thing, it gets more and more, it's transparent in the middle, opaque kind of on the outside, almost sort of like a bubble. You think of like a bubble. So Fresnel really looks kind of like a bubble. So we're going to use this Fresnel function, and we're going to make a new scalar parameter called power, because this is going to be how strong of it is. And we're going to hook that into power. This power is going to get set to a value of 3. And we can actually... So we get something like this. So this is our Fresnel with a power of 3. If we were to go ahead and if we set it back to 1, you can see that we get, it's really deep. Like we have a lot of white, so we'd have like a very thicker looking thing. If we set it up to 10, it's almost all black. So 3 is going to work pretty well for what we're going to end up with. So I'm going to move this kind of out of the way a little bit. These graphs are going to start getting pretty crazy. So let's move it over here. So the next thing we need to do is we are going to create two more scalar parameters. The first one is going to be called reflection front. And I'm just going to do a Control-C, Control-V. The next one is going to be called reflection side. If I can. So we're going to use these two to control, you know, if you're again thinking about that bubble, this is going to control the reflection on the front of our glass surface. This parameter is going to control the reflection on the side of the surface, so that if we ever need to kind of go back and adjust the look of things, these are the things that we're going to be adjusting is these parameters. We are going to then feed them into a lerp. So hold down the L key and click. And we'll feed this into here, feed this into here. And we are going to be actually making two more very similar things. So it's going to be a lot easier to, this gets fed into here too. The Fresnel function gets fed in as the alpha of your lerp. So if we take a look at what's going on with this, I guess we can't quite see it yet. Oh, we got to add parameters. Reflection front, we're going to set to 0.05. It's not going to be crazy reflective. The reflection side, though, should be pretty super reflective. So we'll give it a value of 1. So we're kind of getting like a reflection map of what's going to go on our thing. So not as reflective, super reflective. So we're going to need to do this 2 more times. This is reflection. We still need to do refraction and opacity. So we'll copy this. I have these 3 selected. Control-C, Control-V. We're going to do opacity. Control-C, Control-V for refraction. So this first one, I'm going to rename opacity front. You can just click on the name. And this one is opacity side. You have to be gentle with it. Feed this into here. Opacity front is 0.05. Opacity side is 0.2. I'll post these numbers in the chat. Just a second. These are now refraction front. And refraction side. Refraction front is going to be pretty strong. 1.0. I mean, sorry, 1.2. Refraction side is going to be just 0.8. I'll put these numbers in the chat, actually. Is that helpful? We're almost at a state where I'm going to take a pause to see if people need help. Got that. So the last step is going to be to plug these into our output. So reflection, that lerp goes into roughness. Opacity obviously goes into opacity. And our refraction goes into refraction. So once we apply and save, saving, and we close. We rebuild. The what? Yes. Oh, I know. Oops, I messed up a setting. Hold on. So many little things. Give me 1 second. It does. Oh, shoot, that's what it is. Thank you. Forgot to actually give it an alpha. That would help, wouldn't it? So many lines all over the place. Ta-da! There we go. Glass that actually works like glass. Now, especially if you haven't taken Final Project yet, and you're about to take Final Project, you can say, I can do a fancy glass shader. You should have me on your team. In Unreal. If you've taken photogrammetry, you want to go back and redo your tricky object with the glass shader. and rework that. So there's one last step. I realize some people might still be kind of saving. Is that true? Yeah, I kind of want to go over the last step, and then we could take a quick break and try to work on the last one. Hopefully we can get through the last one. It's just the last thing that they do to help this glass out is going to be to kind of give a little bit more realism to how like the rim is very clear and stuff like that. So they have a opacity mask texture. So let me pull that up. So we are going to try to find some space. I'll do it down here, and there's a new texture. It is T-glass opacity map. Opacity mask. And this is just to kind of give that rim on the top of the glass Like, it shouldn't be clear like that. It looks kind of funny, you know? So all it is like this mask here that we're going to use to kind of fix that. So we are going to find our opacity side up here. This up closer. I'm going to add another lerp where I feed the contents of this into A. And I am going to add a constant set to 1. Actually, you can just do it this way. No, we'll do it this way. Oh, they use a scalar parameter. I'll do it the way that the book does it. And it's just going to be set to 1. So make sure you set the default value to 1. We'll feed that into B. And we are going to use the R channel into the alpha. And then feed this now into that opacity because we added just another layer onto that. So let me do this. I'm gonna, so you can see it as I because my computer's a little bit faster. So we need to open up the next map, which is going to be the 0403 hologram start. Save it all. And we should have our Christmas tree. And what we're going to do is we're going to do a save current as, and we're going to save this one also in our folder. I think I accidentally deleted out the base of the hologram, and that's fine. Like the material is fine. It'll just be black. It's not a big deal. So the way that this model works is it's one model, but it has 2 textures on it. This hologram base, as a Christmas tree base, and the hologram. Since the base is obviously not going to be hologrammy, it's going to be more like a solid color. We needed to split these up into 2 different materials, since what we're going to be doing is kind of like all or nothing. So in this instance, it is better to have 2 different materials applied to this object since they're doing 2 drastically different things. Okay, so we are going to open up this actually, let's do this. It has a starter texture on it, but we need to make sure that we get that into our folder. So let's locate that texture. I'm sorry, it's underneath Assets, Chapter 4. It is this M Christmas tree hologram. We are going to move it to our folder. So I'm going to just grab it and drop it in materials, and I'm going to copy it. Yep. Yes. We don't want the end one. Oh shoot, that shouldn't be there. You should delete that end one because we need to actually do it. Yeah, just delete it. I thought I had deleted all those.
What about the end?
No, that's fine. In fact, if we're not doing anything with the base. It's just there was supposed to be a material there. I think it got weird from the move or something. Okay, so we got that. Make sure you are working with the correct material. I'm going to make sure this is the one that's applied to the hologram on the Christmas tree. And I'm going to open it up. So it's a very basic material, and I think they just had that on there just to have a material on there. So we are going to actually, let's see. And we're going to delete out this base color it has in there because we don't actually need it. So the first thing we need to do is we do need to make some changes to this. So we are going to select this main material node. And then over here, we are going to change the default of the blend mode from opaque to translucent. We're also going to change the default lit, or here the shading model, default lit to unlit. So what this is going to build for us now is usually when we have things that are lit, that means that the lighting in the scene will affect the surface. When we change it to unlit, that means that the lighting in the scene will not affect the surface. So, if we have like a glowing hologram, obviously a light shouldn't be affecting the surface of our hologram because it's a hologram. It's like light itself. So that's why we are changing the shading model to an unlit surface. So the first thing we're going to do is we are going to work on setting up the base color. So we're going to first set down a texture sample by holding down T and clicking. We're going to do a constant, so we're going to hold down 1 and click, and a cheap contrast. So we're just going to right click and start typing contrast and choose that cheap contrast. So the texture sample we're going to use is we're going to, in a previous chapter they had used the Christmas tree, and it's actually like this like wooden Christmas tree. So we're going to utilize that again in here. So it's a little messed up. There we go. So it's kind of might be a little bit hard to find. If you start typing Christmas tree, it's the Christmas tree D, T_Christmas tree _D. And it's like a wooden kind of looking Christmas tree. And then we're not actually going to make it look wood. We're going to kind of make it, again, we're making a hologram. It shouldn't look wooden. So we are going to take the red channel and feed the red channel into the cheap contrast. So we're just going to get a nice grayscale image of it. Red channel into there. And we are going to give this a value of 0.2 and feed that into the contrast. So 0.2 on there. This will make it be a little bit more contrasty, so it'll look a little nicer. So if you want to see what we're doing so far, let's take a look. Might look better on a. We're getting this. So we're going to take this now. We are going to add a multiply node and a constant because we need to color this kind of like a bluish sort of color because holograms are blue, right? So I'm going to hold down M and click for multiply. And I'm going to feed this into A. I'm going to make a constant to really push this with a setting of 2. So now we're really kind of pushing that look. To add that tint, we're just going to add another multiply. It's just going to be this crazy string of multiplies by the end. It's kind of funny. So holding down M and clicking, feeding this into here. what we want to multiply on there is like a bluish sort of color, not like a crazy blue, but like a light kind of blue. So that's a constant vector 3. And the color I'm going to use for this step, I'll actually type it into the chat too. If you want to do a consistent color, is 0.52, 0.55, point. You can, but if you want to try to kind of keep it consistent so that you know that you're doing it correctly. But it's supposed to be kind of like a muted color. Don't make it super saturated. So like if you wanted to do like a green hologram, it would just be a desaturated green, like a light desaturated green. 0.55, sorry, 0.52, 0.55, 0.74. We could take a look. So it's just lightly tinted now. And we are actually going to create another multiply node so we can kind of control the overall brightness of that. So we're actually just going to do this by setting that B value to 0.5. So we're going from that to that. It's got a little bit dimmer. So we can just kind of feed, if you want to feed this into your base color, we can't yet. It's going to be into the emissive color. Just to see where we're at. We're probably going to stop here for today. I think this is a good place to stop. But if you want to see kind of the current results, just feed it into emissive. The next step is going to be adding the grid pattern onto it, and then we're actually going to animate some opacity on it to really make it look like it is a hologram. But it should be looking something like this. So the point of here is it's kind of like a faded. Do you see how it's like a weird faded kind of version of a Christmas tree? So we got to the stage where we have our we made our unlit texture. So let's actually do this. I'll show you. Like if we take the global brightness down, we see that we just see that Christmas tree because it's an unlit texture. And the way that unlit textures work is basically the lighting doesn't affect it. It just is what it is. So for better or worse, it doesn't get light information. It works great for something like a hologram because holograms are supposed to look like they're made out of light. They're not, the way this works though, it's not necessarily like projecting light, but it just kind of has like that glowing sort of look. So an unlit shader is an easy way to kind of get like that glowing sort of look, not like necessarily like a light bulb, but something a little bit kind of in between that. So put that back. You can actually see what it's doing because it doesn't even have any shadows on it because it's unlit. It doesn't get shadows. Let me pull up the material. We can pick up where we left off. If you have a question, the online people, I do have Teams open on the other computer, so you can post to the chat, and I'll see that. So just feel free to post. Let me just remember exactly what step we were at. We got our emissive. Yeah, we got through all the multiplies. I think we're at step 14. Yes.
there a reason why the last multiply is?
We were able, and I think what the book is just trying to illustrate is that there's multiple ways that you can do multiplies. So this one does it with a 2, like this constant 2. You can actually just select that B and give it a value. So it gave it just a 0.5 in there. Can you set it up higher than 2? Yeah, you can. So, you know, downside though, if you have these as this way, this is something that you could elevate to a parameter status. Like if you're trying to build one of those instance materials out of, you would be able to access this and adjust things. But we built this right into the multiply so that we just don't need that. So it's possible the reason these might be is because maybe later they want to make it a parameter. This is just hard-coded into multiply. You're going to find a lot of textbooks like this. They do things multiple ways in different ways. A lot of times it's not necessarily one way is right and one way is wrong. It's just a different way. And just trying to give you all those tools of like the same, it's like multiple, think about like Google Maps. It'll give you multiple paths to the same destination. And it's not that one might be right or wrong. It's just they have, you know, you might want to go one way or the other. You're more comfortable working that way. Okay. So we are, I believe it's step 14, where we want to start building out that grid kind of pattern on it to make it look like a hologram. So I'm going to do that by holding down T and clicking to make a texture node. And the texture sample we are looking for is the T Christmas tree UV. This one right here. Looks something like that. We're then going to add a multiply and a constant 3 so that we can color this. So that, you know, white's kind of boring. Usually with holograms, we think of holograms as having like those blue lines on them. If you wanted to do a green hologram, green holograms work too. But make sure it's kind of like matching this color. It'll look a lot better. So I'm going to hold down 3 and click. Hold down M and click. So I have my multiply and my color that I'm just going to make kind of like a, I don't know what color you would call this, like a dark cyan maybe, a little bit more bluish, like one of those kind of colors. Honestly, it doesn't like 100% matter. You just want something kind of bold that matches this color that you multiplied over the Christmas tree. So let's see what this is doing here. So we're getting that color then on top of our lines. So pretty basic, but we kind of want to give sort of a glowing look to this. So we're going to actually throw this into another multiply. And change the B value of this multiply up high. We really want to make it kind of glowing. So we're going to actually set that constant B to 50. Oh, watch this. So it looks like this. I'm going to switch it to this node. And we get like that glowy kind of effect because we're just kind of strengthening it. So the next stage is going to be to take this, hold on, our lines, and we need to combine them together with the Christmas tree, like that other one. And what node do we use to blend things? Not quite the add, even though add will kind of blend the lerp add, because we don't want to necessarily, I should emphasize, I should have clarified it a little bit. how would we make it so it's almost like you have two layers in Photoshop where one is on top and one is on the bottom? I guess that's a better way to explain it. With the top one having a transparency is the lerp node, but you can use adds in some situations. So we're going to lerp these two. So I'm going to down. We want the ghost wood to go into slot A because that's the bottom. And then we want our lines to go in slot B. And need our alpha, which is going to mask out to the areas where we want to see B, but we don't want to. We want to be able to see A below that. And the book does have you create a new. How does it do that? The book tells you to make another texture node so that you can use the alpha of that texture sample here. I don't understand why you can't just do this, so that's what I'm going to do. Is just use the alpha on this texture sample rather than make a million texture samples. Maybe because it makes it cleaner. I don't know. But if we turn this lerp node on now, so Ghostwood lines using the alpha on that UV, we get the combination of the two. Isn't that neat?
Cleaned up a lot because I had it in an ad before. And
yeah. I'm gonna make some room. We're not quite done yet. We're gonna keep pushing this. All right, so what's next? How's online doing? Are you good?
It didn't show up for me, but I don't know if that's just my computer.
Sure. I can always do a one-on-one with you when we're done and see and help you. Do you mean it's not showing up like I'm doing?
So it just shows like the original hologram. I'm okay if you want to continue, and
okay.
like you said, deal with it later.
Sure. Okay. Let's see. Christmas UVs. So the next thing we're going to implement is right now, if we were to feed this in, and we can do that real quick too, and see what it looks like. It's looking good, but we can kind of push it a little bit so that we can utilize like that Fresnel again, so that it's a little bit, ooh, down there. Looks kind of funny sometimes. Draw order issues. We're going to introduce a Fresnel into this because remember the Fresnel where it's really light on the outside and black in the center, like that sphere. We're going to lerp a Fresnel node. We're going to utilize a Fresnel node as a mask so that we can have stronger like a more solid look to it compared in the middle. I'm sorry, brighter on the edges, dimmer in the middle, kind of like how when you look at a glass, it's more transparent looking straight on and the edges have more opacity. We're going to do something very similar for our Christmas tree to kind of give it more of like that holographic sort of look rather than just the solidness of this. Oops, wrong one. So we are first going to create a multiply node. We're going to feed this lerp into A. I'm sorry. Yes, feed this into A. The B is going to have a value of 10. So pretty crazy bright. Yeah, so the B value gets a value of 10. Oh, shoot. I messed that up, didn't I? Let me just delete that. Okay. And oh, I'm putting this in the wrong spot. I'm sorry. Oh, no, this is correct. Sometimes these little graphs get confusing. Okay, multiply. We'll do another lerp. So we're going to feed the one not multiplied into A, the multiplied one into B, and the alpha is going to be our Fresnel. So this is like the brighter one, like that. And we're going to use that Fresnel to make it just on the edges. So if you right click and type Fresnel, we can just feed this in. Let me do this. I'm going to make this one the live one. And let's feed this in. The alpha. It would help if we hooked it into Opacity. It is of color too, huh? Okay, let me try that again. Save. You know, I'm not really seeing much of a difference. Let me do it this way. Let's see. There might be a slight difference to it. Yeah.
I use a Fresnel function.
It works better.
Yeah.
Okay, let's try that. Let's try a Fresnel function. That looks a lot more noticeable. I can see it already. Yeah, you can see it's like dimmer here than it was before, and definitely a lot brighter there. So even though the book says Fresnel, or I don't even know if I'm pronouncing that right, Fresnel, the Fresnel function does seem to give better results. Let's see. Oh, okay. Let's also. Let me try feeding it. Kind of like we did with the glass. I'm sorry, constant, not a contrast. Four looks pretty good. I think I like that better. Okay. How's everyone doing? And get through the shader we have one more part to do with this to fully make it look like a hologram. What we're going to do is we're going to implement some scan lines on here that are animated so that it can kind of control the transparency of things so that that ghosty white wood, bluish wood we have looks more ghosted, so that it's kind of like coming in and out a little bit. You know, think about other holograms you've seen. It'll just help add to that realism rather than just having it look solid like that. So we're going to try to find some space. Let me kind of move this up a little bit like this. I'm going to work in here. And I'm going to make a new texture sample by holding the T key and clicking. And the texture sample we want is called Christmas Tree Scan Lines. Scan lines. T Christmas Tree Scan Lines. It's a pretty simple one. It's just like a bunch of grayscale lines going back and forth, because we're ultimately going to be using this in the opacity. So we need to, it just needs to be grayscale for us. So since this object is unwrapped, we can't just, you know, apply this to the Christmas tree as is, because it'll go on that unwrap, it'll look really funny. So what we can do instead is we can use a bounding box based node, UVW node, so that we can project the scan lines on our object rather than relying on those UVs. So we're going to do this by, we're going to need to do it over here. I'm going to right click and start typing bounding box. It's this bounding box based 01 UVW. I think they're exactly the same. I think it's just in two different spots. They look named the same to me, so I assume that they're the same. So we're going to use this to project this texture onto the model rather than use its UV space. So we need to get this all kind of hooked up correctly. So in order to do that, we're going to make a make float to node. So we're going to be able to have two floats into a single thing. We are going to feed the G into the X and the B into the Y. We are going to then add a 1 minus node to invert these numbers. Make them negative. So can we preview this node? What would it look like? Interesting. Next, we're going to do a multiply. So we hold down M and click, feed this into the A. We're going to set the B to 3. Strengthening it up. We then want to make this move. We want our bounding box stuff to move. And we're going to, what do we use to make things move in our textures? Yes. Yes, so we're going to connect this up now to a panner. The coordinates. And then we can just feed this we can first start feeding this into our UVs. We do need to set our speed on the panner, but I'm going to just let me. It won't let me make it live yet. Okay. So we can do this one. We just want them kind of going up and down. We don't need it to be going all over the place. So we will set the Y speed to 0.025. We don't need to set the X speeds because we just want it going up and down. We don't want it going side to side. 0.025. So it's going to be very slow, you know, because things like scan lines are meant to go kind of slow. Ooh, it's glowing now. It'll all work out in the end, trust me. There we go. Do you see how now they're just kind of slowly going upwards on that sphere instead of just being stationary? So we're going to utilize this as our opacity. So hold on. We're going to want to add a little bit of variation to this too. So like the single line looks good. We can push it just a little bit more to add some more interest to this than just that single scan line going up. So under, let's see. So we're going to actually duplicate this. So I'm going to highlight all of these, Control C, Control V. So we can make a second set of lines. But the difference is on this multiply, we're going to change it from 3 to 6. We have two different ones. So that one looks like that. That one looks like that. So they're much smaller, so we can combo those two together. This is where we're going to use that add node. So we can just add these two together rather than using the lerp where we would like mask them where one is the other. We're actually going to do an add. So we'll do an add. A little bit closer. And let's preview this node. So do you see how you can kind of see where the thin ones and the thick ones, like they're kind of moving? It's kind of making like almost like they kind of remind me of like blinds, like window blinds. In a weird sort of way. So after this add, we need to add 2 constant 3s, and we're going to give them some like a grayscale value, because we're going to be lerping them together. So hold 3 and click twice. The first one we want to have a value of 0.2. All the settings. Gonna be kind of like a medium-ish gray, and the other one's going to have 1 in all the settings. So we're going to get a white. We're then going to use a lerp to pull these together. So gray on the top, white on the bottom. I guess in order for to get some stuff to work, you kind of have to make these vector 3s rather than the constants. That's what the book tells me. I'm not quite familiar with the nuances of how all these work, all these nodes work, but that's something to be aware of. Sorry, I'm just making sure I'm not missing anything. I don't see it in the directions to add another multiply, but it is in the image, so I'm going to do that anyway, where we're going to add a last multiply node so we can control this a little bit better with the B set to 0.8. And then the last thing we need to do is just put this into the opacity of here. So we can just feed that multiply into the opacity. Let's see what we come up with. There we go. So you can sometimes see the wall through. It's kind of a neat effect here when you can kind of like half see through it because you can half see that hologram. And that should be the end of it.